Hello peeps, this is Shaylin with Puppy Night Props, back for my second video. And for this video, I'll be showing you how I made Sabito and Makomo's mask from the anime Demon Slayer. Now, some of you might be asking, why Demon Slayer? And the answer is, ever since I started watching the first season, I completely fell in love with it. Just the character development and the awesome action scenes and everything. Plus the adorable little Nezuko. What's not to like about it? I've probably watched the show like 4 or 5 times right now, even though there's only one season out. Yeah, I'm a little obsessed. I even made my family watch the first season with me, even though they don't normally watch anime on their own. They're getting there, slowly but surely. My nose is just... Yeah, I just like making weird noises. You can just ignore that. So, without spoiling too much of the show, Sabito and Makomo show up and they help teach the main character Tanjiro to improve his sword fighting. And when they show up, you see they're both wearing these weird kitsune fox masks. So, of course, when I saw these masks, I figured I had to make one for myself. In this case, 2, possibly 3 if I get around to Tanjiro's mask too. But in this video, I'll just be making Sabito and Makomo's masks. Another reason for doing this project has been that I was inspired by a lot of the other makers out there who put out tutorials and template videos. On top of just being really entertaining to watch most of the time, these videos contain a lot of great techniques and tips for making cosplays. That's how I learned a lot of the techniques that I'm using in this video. Before this, I had never even really worked with EVA foam. I've learned so much from watching their videos, and I kinda just wanted to do the same thing for other people that they did for me. So now that I've gotten all that out of the way, I guess we can go ahead and do a craft.
To start, I printed out copies of both the templates. Links to both templates can be found in the description, so feel free to print them out and follow along. One template will be used to construct the basic mask, and the other template has some of the facial details from the masks in the show. Next, I'll be cutting out my template. To do this, you can use either an X-Acto knife, or just a plain pair of scissors. Once all the pieces were cut out, I used my handy-dandy X-Acto knife to cut out the registration marks. Be sure to save the little bits of paperfetti off to the side in case you need to attend an emergency surprise party later. And here are all the pieces cut out. I made sure to give them a nice shuffle before dealing them out. If you plan to make one of the masks from the show, you can also use the second template. For the sun-looking mark on Tanjiro's mask, I suggest you keep it all in one piece and use the negative space to draw on your pattern. Otherwise, you have to deal with a bunch of tiny pieces, and that can get really messy. I would keep the face details somewhere you won't lose them. I put mine in a little Ziploc for safekeeping and freshness. Next, I laid out the template on a sheet of 6mm thick EVA foam. Since my awesome TNT foam marker died recently, I'll be using this white paint pen to trace out the template instead. RIP little marker. It's probably a good idea to use something to hold your template in place while you trace. Heh, rhymes. Otherwise you risk the template moving around a lot, which you see it's doing for me right now. Don't forget to trace over your little registration marks. They deserve a little love too. I also labeled all my pieces to remember which piece is which. Once you've traced out all the pieces, flip them over and trace out the other half. Or don't. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. To cut out my foam, I used a sharp box cutter. I tried to keep the blade perpendicular to my cutting surface and move the knife smoothly through the foam to get nice clean cuts. You may also want to leave a little room around the beveled sections. Also, remember to sharpen your knife every now and then to prevent tearing, because with foam, tearing isn't sharing. And now to cut out the beveled sections, which are labeled in the template. To cut bevels, tilt your knife at an angle when making your cuts. In my templates, convex bevels mean tilting the knife inward, and concave bevels mean tilting it outward. You can either use small angles or large ones depending on how much you want to tilt the knife.
And here's what we got right now.
If you're making Sabito's mask, you'll need to do some extra tracing and cutting for the eyes. Taking the eye template I used earlier, I cut out the line I've marked for Sabito's eyes. I then traced the template onto the foam where I drew the eyes earlier and cut the whole thing out with my knife. I added a bevel to the bottom of the eyes and cleaned up the cuts really quick with my Dremel. I also softened the edges on the inside of the eyes. Careful of your fingies.
And here's a preview of the fabric we'll be putting behind them later.
Now I need to construct some ears for this foxy mama. For each ear, I'll be layering together 3 pieces of 6mm thick EVA foam. 1 for the back of the ear and 2 for the, outer parts, I guess? Cartilage? Not really sure what to call this. In addition, I need a piece of foam for the inner ear. Since I want the inner ear to curve inward somewhat, I used some thinner foam. These 2 so-called parts are made by cutting out the center of the ear pattern and using the outer portion. Before cutting it out, I made the pattern slightly wider on the sides. I superglued the inner ear inside one of the outer ear pieces I cut earlier. Once the glue dried, I took the foam outside and torched that sucker with my heat gun until it was soft enough for me to curve the inside portion with my fingies. More superglue and this piece was connected to the back of the ear. To make the front of the ear more rounded, I beveled it with my Dremel. I was trying to keep the foam dust in my apartment to a minimum by attaching a vacuum to my desk, but that stuff tends to spread like glitter. Smack this piece on top of the rest of the ear and you're good to go. Some extra cleanup and beveling is all that's left now.
We'll attach the ears to the rest of the mask later, but for now we can put them off to the side. So, I'm sorry to say that for the next couple parts, I don't really have footage to show you guys. Since my craft room here isn't very well ventilated, and because I'd like the safety deposit back on my apartment, I wasn't really able to film some of the more hazardous or messy parts of the build. I'll try my best to explain what I did and fill in any footage that I can. Since I wanted to show how all the foam pieces go together, I built an entirely new mask out of scrap foam to get the footage.
Firstly, I cleaned up the edges using my Dremel. Then I did some preliminary heat shaping and sealing with my heat gun. You know, on my plastic table, which isn't heat resistant. Guys, I swear I'm smart, I just do dumb things sometimes. At least I remembered to wear my respirator and work in a well-ventilated area.
And now, to interrupt your regularly scheduled programming to give you this safety message.
So since I don't show it, I just want to remind you guys that when you're working with some of these materials, you should always keep safety in mind and always wear the proper safety equipment. When heating up EVA foam or using contact cement, you always want to make sure you wear a respirator, since contact cement tends to give off some harmful fumes and so does EVA foam when it's heated up. And if you're doing any kind of sanding or dremeling on foam, you want to make sure you're wearing goggles as well as your respirator. Respirator so that you make sure you're not breathing in those little dusty particles, and a pair of goggles so that you don't get anything kicked back into your eyes, because that would not be fun at all. But yeah, just be careful, people.
Since I don't really plan to use this mask for anything and just wanted to get the filming done quickly, I used hot glue instead of contact cement to put the pieces together. While hot glue works well enough on foam, I don't recommend it on visible seams, since it tends to be a bit messy. I started with the darts along the jaw. Here I'm just adding glue to the edges and slowly squidging them together, careful to line up my registration marks. I think the best way to do this is to start by putting the eye and nose together. Then add the eyebrow piece, the jaw, and the forehead, but doing them out of order won't make a huge difference. Don't forget the forehead darts too. Once each side of the face was done, I was able to smash the two halves together. To make the mask more closely resemble the masks in the show, we'll need to apply heat and manipulate the foam to get the curves the way we want. You will also need to check the fit of the mask. I had to cut a bit of material around the outer edges of both masks, since they were a bit big for my face. Right now I'm just cleaning up the edges I've glued together with my Dremel. I also took off a lot of material along the nose and mouth so the features of the mask will look more rounded. And if you ask me, it's starting to look like an actual mask. And here's another part where I wasn't able to film. So off camera, I heat treated the base with a heat gun to seal it and get rid of the little foam fuzzies. I beveled the back of the ears some so that they would lie flatter on the head and glued them into place. I also superglued strips of foam to the back of the mask to help it keep its curve. Don't get too excited seeing Tanjiro's mask. I don't really plan to make a video for it. I just really wanted the mask for myself. Don't worry, I'll still show off some pictures when it's done though. Nom nom nom. At this point, the mask was looking pretty good, but there were a couple of obvious cracks where I'd glued the pieces together. I filled in a bunch of the larger cracks using foam clay. The nice thing about foam clay is that it's easy to sculpt and you can smooth it out with a little bit of water on your finger. Also, once it dries, you can sand it just like the foam and clean up the edges. Just be careful applying heat to thinner layers of foam, because sometimes it'll form little bubbles. And bubbles means troubles. Boop. If you don't have any foam clay to fix your mistakes, you can also use Quickie Seal. I smudged some Quickie Seal into smaller cracks and smoothed it out with a wet finger. Using a cheap soldering iron, I burned in some of the face details such as the mouth, nose, and eyes. Don't worry if this doesn't come out perfect. You can use foam clay to smooth out the burned-in details and add more dimension. For instance, I added some clay to the nose to build it out. The hidden secret of art. Hide your mistakes. Now I'll show you how to finish off both masks. I'll start with Makomo's mask, since it's the first one I made, and frankly didn't turn out as good as the other one. Off camera, I sealed the foam using spray-on Plastidip. I applied gray primer, then painted the whole thing white. I painted the burned-in details using black paint and a small liner brush. I tried really hard not to color outside the lines, but I still had to go back and fix up a few mistakes. Then I bopped that cute little nose with some red paint. The inside of the ears got some nice caution tape yellow. And finally, it was time to add the flower details. Taking the flower pattern from my second template, I cut them out and traced them on with some pencil. The inside of the flower got the same yellow as the ears, and the outside is this really pretty light blue. Finally, since my hand painting isn't the best, I used a black Sharpie to outline the whole flower. I also think it gives a nice graphic look like in the show. What you don't see here is me adding some weathering to the outside of the mask. I just did this with some watered down brown paint and wiped up the excess with a wet paper towel. After that, I sealed in the paint with some satin spray varnish. Finally, I glued in some elastic so the mask will stay on my head. And that's Makomo's mask done for now. Before I show you the finished product, I'll show you how I finished up Sabito's mask, which I am indefinitely more proud of. Same deal with Makomo's mask. I started Sabito's by brushing on a base layer of gray paint. Hopefully this will give all the other paint a nice surface to adhere to. This one also has the same base white color as the last one. Wow, 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 wow. And again, the mask gets some black paint around the eyes, nose, and mouth. I tried to make the edges of Sabito's eyes a little more pointed when I was painting. I wanted him to look like the true edgelord he is. After that, I painted the inside of the ears with this nice pink color. And let's not forget Sabito's iconic scar. Taking the scar pattern that I cut out earlier, I taped it onto the mask where I thought it would go based off of the reference shot. I then traced it out with a pencil, and apparently didn't film any of the painting of the scar. All I really did was paint the inside with a tan color, and outline the whole thing with a black Sharpie. I also drew in some little sketchy marks like you see in the show. I just thought it would add some nice character. And at this point, we're practically done. Little did Shaylin know this was not the end of the road. For you see, when she went to seal in her paint job, disaster would strike. Being inexperienced sealing paint, she laid it on too thick and the paint cracked. And apparently the black paint markers that she was using to outline this scar also ran when they were exposed to varnish. So yeah, basically I had to sand the whole thing and just kind of start over on the paint job. I was too exhausted to film any of the secondary painting, so sorry about that. But you get the idea. And actually, it looked a lot better after I repainted it. I also added some weathering like I did on the last one. A little more sparingly, though. After the whole incident with the spray varnish, I was kind of gun-shy to use it again, so I just ended up sealing the whole thing with some matte Mod Podge. This won't be as durable as spray varnish, but it should be fine. With the painting done, we can start adding some accessories. To cover Sabito's gaping eye holes, I used some black sheer fabric. This will make the eyes look black, but also allow me to see out of them. I used a piece of paper and pencil to trace out the basic shape of the eye, cut it out, and traced it onto the fabric. Be sure to leave some extra fabric around the edges so you can glue it down. I tacked down the fabric with a bit of super glue so it covered the hole, and added a bunch of hot glue around the edges to make sure those suckers weren't going anywhere. For Sabito's pupils, I decided to use some googly eyes. Just sanded them a little and painted them with white paint. You could also use foam, but I didn't feel like it, and I like the little noise the googly eyes make when you shake them. Just add glue and you're good. All that was left was the strap to keep the mask on my face. Apparently braided red rope is harder to find than I thought, so I just braided together some thick red yarn I got from the craft store. It's not ideal, but at least it's super soft and squishy. I wanted to reinforce the strap some, so I glued a small leather strap to the back. I added a little bit of elastic inside the mask for it to connect to. This should help the strap to fit on my head better. For the tassels that hang down the sides, I took some more red braided yarn, tied a knot near the end, and separated out some of the smaller strands. Then I glued the tassels to the back of the strap. To make the mask a little more comfortable, you can also add some foam chunks to the inside. just use a little hot glue and smoosh it in. And we're done! Hooray! And now onto them booty shots.
This is making me super nauseous right now. So that was the video. I really enjoyed making it, and the masks turned out really good. I can't wait to wear them to cons, you know, once things open back up a little more. And of course, if you liked the video, feel free to hit the subscription button so that you know if I put out any more content, and hit the like button so I can keep creating these videos. And if you have any suggestions for future projects or builds that you want to see, feel free to write about it in the comments. If you didn't see, I also had a sort of prologue video before this one. It was just basically showing how I made my template, so if you're interested, feel free to click on that link. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Brr brr.